the assignment from the September city servants meeting 2023 was this, that we would ask some of the national leaders who helped convene unified teaming and strategy under Jesus Christ through best practices to bring the light of his salvation and the life of his kingdom into all spheres of our city. These leaders, namely being Chuck Proudfit and Ford Taylor, who are helping other cities to do that, would help us do that here. Chuck also leads convening tables in Cincinnati, including At Work on Purpose and NET. And then this table, and then there's the Mosaics network of multi-ethnic movement of the Church of Jesus Christ in our city. And there's other tables. Now we're learning about Angelina's table that she's been convening the last 3 years, praise the Lord. But imagine if we had a way, an infrastructure, communication lines, and staffing to coordinate saturationally for the whole gospel for the whole city through the whole church till he comes. And then out from our city, life to the ends of the earth. Our contribution, along with other city churches across the world. And so we took our assignment from the September meeting, this group saying, we need that. That's what we need. And remember, that followed a summer of SWOT analysis on things of the kingdom in our city, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And in the end, we decided we just don't have, for our city movement, infrastructure, communication lines, and staffing. What if we did? We have unity, we have harmonizing hearts, we have a posture of unity. Not everybody knows each other, not everyone is united. It's a city of 2 million. There's so many things going on, but there is a heart and a spirit of leaning in together, Jew and Gentile in Jesus across our whole city, black, white, brown, female, male, interdenominationally, from believers within the Catholic movement to the Protestant movement to all of these things. And not that any of those are monolithic, but as we come together as one, we can be saturational together. That manifold wisdom can actually inform all that we do and put demons and principalities on notice, back up. And so that allows for more flourishing in all lives, in all spheres of our city. So we went to, Brian Taylor and I went to Ford and Chuck and laid this out to them. And they came back with hey, here's what we could do. We could do a city impact meeting, and it would be a 2-day meeting, and it would be in the spring, and we would have a group of neutral leaders that help convene that. And then it wouldn't just be the two of them leading and presenting, but they would take from a diverse group of women and men in the churches of and ministries of and in the ecclesia of Greater Cincinnati, and that team would diversely lead, facilitate, and present those 2 days. And they shared with us a plan. They shared with us the funding required. They offered to raise or help raise that funding. They said, we're very excited, and this is something we've dreamed about. And we came back together as the core team with the yay and amen and agreed we should have Ford and Chuck share with the rest of the team and record it today for all those who are on the email list of 100 that many of whom will want to listen in on it. So at this point, I think what we want to, ask of you, Ford and Chuck, would you share with us what you think the next steps could be? Share with us whatever might be on your heart initially, and then what the next steps could be. And then we've already decided as a team, we want to lean in on this, imagining relationship in small groups all across the city, but also strategic work happening as a macro ecclesia for the city through Christ in us. So Ford and Chuck.
The journey for this, for me, most recently started as Chris and the city servants were sending out the notes from the SWOT analysis that all of you had been undertaking. And being a guy who does business consulting for a living, along with the At Work on Purpose ministry, and reading through that, I could relate to everything that you put down. And for years, I have felt that in Cincinnati, we have all of the raw ingredients to have an absolutely phenomenal city movement initiative. But it's almost like we have a bunch of component parts that are in the same garage, but they haven't been assembled together. And that was, at least for me, part of the spirit that I took out of that SWOT analysis. And I was just stepping back to reflect on that. And I had emailed Chris and said, I'm just wondering if there might be an opening for us to do in Cincinnati what Ford Taylor and I have been doing in a series of cities across the country, where we're gathering component parts of the Big C Church across the garage, across the whole city, so that we can assemble something that together would represent so much more than we could do individually, not to lay down what we're doing, but to be able to set aside those things so that we could look collectively at what a Big C effort could look like in the Big C city of Cincinnati. As I was listening this morning, Angelina, I was thinking, for example, of the Gulliver prophecy, which I think that you're referencing. And it's fascinating to me in that prophetic word that Cincinnati is essentially a city of reproductive organs. In other words, things that could be birthed here in Cincinnati that could be shared as a blessing for other cities and other places. And I actually see that already happening, but I don't think we've even scratched the surface on what's possible there. Alex, I'm thinking back to you and me together in Columbus, Ohio, as we were together at the conference with the For Columbus Ministry, which is organized around a construct of bringing together congregations and nonprofits in the workplace, and recognizing that there is a collective effort and integration there that absolutely could happen in Cincinnati in just the same way. So this is just a little bit of the backdrop for how we got where we are. What Ford and I have been blessed to do together over the last couple years is to work in a series of cities where we could bring those component parts of the Big C Church together and imagine what that city could look like for the Lord over the course of decades. You know, what could we collectively do together? As part of that journey, Ford and I were bringing into that our own history working together with all of the hits and misses that come with that, and with city movements, to understand that there are three things that typically trip up city movement efforts. And if we could get really good at these three things, it would be game changing, not just in Cincinnati, but any city. The first one is healthy relationships, which I know sounds so obvious, but the hard truth of it is that in any city, you'll have a set of leaders in the church who have broken relationships, all kinds of stuff that's happened. And in the absence of reconciliation and then eventually opportunities for collaboration, you don't have a foundation for growth. And the hardest thing in the church is that we often don't even want to talk about those broken relationships because we know that we shouldn't have them. So we just don't talk about them. They just lie there under the surface until on occasion they erupt, but they literally derail us from the opportunity to have a starting point for collaborative effort. So healthy relationships is part one. Part two is shared vision. It's fun for me as I was just listening this morning and knowing about the vision that guides each of you in individual initiatives. I think about, Chris, the work that you do at People's Church, but with the Mosaic Network, and the idea of bringing the church together across ethnic boundaries that typically segregate us as a church, and how inspiring that is. But I could go to a Brian Kaiser at Vernovus, and knowing that you have an ecclesia, a beachhead for the kingdom that just happens to reside in the recruiting arena. But how cool is that in the marketplace for our city? And I know that every one of us has vision that's driving us forward for the individual effort that God's called us to lead or to help lead. But the question with the city movement is, what is our shared vision? Not just that we have a bunch of visions in the city, what's our shared vision for the city? While that's easy to say, that's actually not easy to do. To get a set of people coming from very different vantage points to articulate a shared vision for a city and to align to that vision is not a no-brainer. So that is the second thing. The third thing is sustained momentum. So often city efforts almost become like a flash in the pan. I remember as a little kid, I didn't grow up in a Christian household, but on occasion I would hear about crusades. And at first I thought they were, like the medieval knights, but it was also Billy Graham and doing crusades and doing festivals in cities and so forth. And it's not that those are bad things, but the problem is if you don't build an infrastructure to follow up on the energy of the moment, then what you get is a moment instead of a movement. It requires infrastructure on the ground with a set of committed people over the long term who are well organized in teams to deliver sustained effort that moves the ball forward to raise up quality of life, peace and prosperity, flourishing in a city. That's not a no-brainer either. These city impact initiatives, in summary, are designed to deliver on those three things. Across a city, what does it look like to build into healthy relationships, shared vision, and sustain momentum? I'm wondering, Caleb, since you just happened to be on this Zoom call today, which I'll consider serendipitous at least, Ford and I, with some others, did a city impact initiative up in Dayton, Ohio, a couple years ago. And just yesterday, I was up with Caleb in Dayton at a Unified Dayton conference, which is all about city movement for the greater Dayton area. And Caleb, I was wondering if you might just briefly speak into what that experience was like for you working with Ford and myself as we were building out the focus on a city initiative and then that 2-day workshop and then what's followed since.
5 stars, highly recommend. Anything else?
No, sure, that'll do.
No, so yeah, happy to share. Thanks for the invite. So for us in Dayton, I would say our context of, well, first of all, I'm going to say we absolutely still unify Dayton from the Unify Cincy gatherings. No shame. So I'm just putting that out there. So thank you for that inspiration of the Unify Cincy lunches. That it was like that. Yeah, let's pull that, and it's stuck. So we had a number of different networks. Again, not only, of course, there's hundreds of churches, hundreds of nonprofits doing amazing work, but there were even multiple networks in the Dayton area. So Declare, which I'm with, being one of them, but also the Miami Valley Leadership Foundation. You could look at the Global Leadership Summit gathering, had a strong network in the Dayton area. Some of the John Maxwell's transformation tables, the West Dayton Caravan, right? We all go down the list of these different networks that already exist. And so I noticed that in the Dayton area, and I had to stop and pray and say, okay, God, so for us to be functioning more and more to see the kingdom of God revealed, for the goodness of Jesus to be revealed for all people across the city, do I then need to strengthen and make the Declare network bigger to swallow up all these ones? Or do we all partner together under truly the kingdom mission of Jesus? And so thankfully, I would pick that latter option. And it was really a blessing as we were praying through that, as we had already built relationships with these other network leaders over a couple of years. About 2 years ago, Ford and Chuck came to me with this idea of having this 2-day summit. And to be honest, I was hopefully healthily skeptical. And I said, if I didn't know both of them already, I would have been even more skeptical, but just said, there's been enough national movements. And some of you, Chris, Chuck, you've coached me through some of this. You know some of the backstory. There's been enough national movements trying to land their next gathering in different cities. I'm really not interested in adding another brand. I'm not interested in using at least our network relationships to add another brand in the Dayton area. Let me make sure I understand what this is. And as I talked with them through it, heard more of their heart to really help us in the Dayton area discern, come alongside and help us discern together what God is doing that could help really bring together this network in a much stronger way. And praise God, the 5 stars would recommend, is that is absolutely what has happened. So we gathered November 9th and 10th, still remember the dates, 2021. And during those 2 days, the blessing of it was it created a space that I didn't have to be the facilitator. So it made it easier for me to be one more neutral person around the table. And there was certainly still that respect and leadership within the city, but it allowed me to be a participant at an equal with Jay Schindler and these other organizational leaders of these other networks. And for those 2 days, as we talked more about what does it look like for us to lead in the model of Jesus in a kingdom-centric way, but then also what does that mean? What's a vision and a mission for our city? It was great. The only thing I would say is, as good as those 2 days are, it's absolutely still going to require the continuing prayer. So it took us then 2 years following that to really, so that was a huge kickstart. Would do it again, but it took us committing to monthly meetings as a servant core team after that for the next 1 and then 2 years to really formalize what is our vision and mission, put it on paper. And you could say from a business model, wow, that took a long time, but that was such a crucial year of growth building. Now you're doing that month after month after month. So I'm not saying it has to be a repeat process, but just acknowledging, don't be discouraged if at the end of 2 days, not everything's hammered out. That's a huge kickstart to accelerate that process, to really discern what God has. And there is a certain amount of structure. We could talk what's happening in different cities around Ohio. There's no magic bullet of how it has to work, but Alex and others on this call are in those conversations too. So there's so many lessons I think we can learn from each other. And I'm just excited. I've learned so much from all of you already. So I'm just excited to be a fly on the wall and see a piece of that coming into even greater focus for Greater Cincinnati.
Thank you, Caleb. Caleb modeled something up in Dayton that would be true with all of us for this. While he was leading Declare Dayton, and he still does, he set that aside in the context of the City Impact Initiative so that he was walking into an effort for all of Greater Dayton with all of the church of Greater Dayton. And out of that emerged something called Unify Dayton, not Declare. That's why, Chris, you were absolutely right. I intend to be a participant in the City Impact Initiative. I bring the At Work on Purpose citywide workplace ministry community to this, and Networks Embracing Transformation to this, but I am setting aside those nameplates for the common effort of the Big C Church all across Greater Cincinnati coming together to ask the question, what could we do together that would be even beyond that? And having no preconceptions about what it's called or how it's organized. And that is easier to say than it is to do. We're so acclimated to carrying what we do into what we're doing. And this is an exercise in setting aside what we do for a moment to explore what God could do through all of us together that's even bigger and better. What came after Dayton was an opportunity for Ford and myself to work in a series of additional cities, which have included Abbeville, South Carolina, Orlando, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We're on the verge of starting in Seattle, Washington, and in every single case, these are cities that have all kinds of bits and pieces, component parts, networks that already exist, but are still looking for how to come together in healthy relationship with shared vision and sustained momentum to be the whole church, bringing the whole gospel to the whole city. Now, I'm going to pass the ball to Ford here. All right, Ford, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. Yeah, guys, I can't even tell you what a blessing it's been to work alongside Chuck these last 2 or 3 years. Because of a lot of you literally on this screen, because of your friendship, your mentorship, you're staying in the game when I was completely lost in what I'm doing. We're now able to take a lot of those things that we learned in Cincinnati all those years ago. I think the city servants, Chris, if I remember correctly, started, was it 2004 or 5? I just remember it was you and Jerry Kirk and Ralph Godfrey and John Stevenson. We were sitting upstairs in the office. Yeah. I can't remember what year it was, but just a vision around what would it look like, if the whole church, like what Chuck and Chris both just said, what would it look like? As we started down that path, I was getting frustrated on lots of levels, but one of those was that there were national leaders that I didn't know at the time. Troy and Chris may remember this 8x8 chart that Chuck and I were presenting that eventually got used, and then Cincinnati built their own. But this 8x8 chart that breaks things down across the spheres, mountains, streams, cultural influences of society, but it also breaks down what the Bible says to do within each of those streams. And that is just a template that we're showing other cities. And we call that a kingdom perspective, an ecclesia perspective, as opposed to a local church perspective. And the really neat part of that is, it's being accepted so quickly, and people are coming up. It's just a template, and then they're doing their own model, as Caleb just said. But in that frustration years ago, I called a lot of guys together, men and women from around the country, and all I asked was, why aren't you working together to give city reachers like me someone to follow? Why do I have to pick one of you? I don't understand. And all of them at once said, if you'll call us, we'll come. And I said, guys, I'm not looking to lead you. I'm looking to follow. Please work together. If you guys will work together, I'll get all the city leaders, we'll follow you. And they all came to town for 2 days. And in that 2-day period, they agreed, I'll say, some of y'all have heard some of these things from me before already, things that might get you called into a room and accused of witchcraft, actually. But things like a 2-legged stool can't stand. It's not just the commission. It's not just making disciples, it's kingdom. What about that third leg? What about the true definition of the word ecclesia? So we came in this room and I shared with them back then, and I share it now globally. One of my favorite songs, which is not a good song, but I love the beat to it, that I listened to growing up, and some of you probably have never heard it because you're a couple of generations later. But the words say, we're playing checkers while the devil's playing chess. And it's frustrating to watch, strategies that so clearly work against us. But if we could get cities to use those same strategies, the momentum they would get is the same that all these other strategies against us get. And so we left that meeting and said, one day, just what if, national leaders came together, city leaders came together, and they did have a common language, because this is what our competition has. They have a common language. They are not divided by theology. It is a common language with a clear vision, a clear purpose, a clear mission, with clear objective strategies and action plans. It's very clear. And they even write books before they start saying, while we know what we're about to convince America of is not true, we can still convince them if we stick together. I mean, it's in their books. And so that's, like Chuck just said, that's one of the things they have. Something else they have is money. All right, so that's part of that sustained momentum, and we can talk about that when we're all together. And the other one is a very clear communication or technology, where they can communicate through technology. So we agreed all those years ago, if we ever had that, just maybe on a national level and on a city reaching level, some of these things might work. And that was, I can't remember, that's 12, 15 years ago. So I want to encourage all of you, okay, because of what you've poured into me, what you've poured into Chuck, what we've poured into each other, Chuck and now are now, you heard Chris use a word and they touched on it, called neutral conveners. So when we go into a city, we're looking for neutral conveners. What are those? Those are the peacemakers in the city. Those are the people that are willing to lay down their thing at the feet of everybody else. They're not giving it up. They're not stopping what they do. But to give you an example, the momentum that we're getting nationally, it's coming. We're working with the Great Awakening Project. We're working with All America. Angelina, you may know Joel McGill. I don't know with All America. He's a YWAM dude. The U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce, Lance Wallnau. I mean, all these people that historically struggled with working together, okay, we're saying to them, we'll be your neutral conveners. And so in a city, if you have neutral conveners, what are they? They're peacemakers. They don't stop doing the call that God gave them to do, but they say things to each other like Chuck and I are saying nationally. What's mine is yours. It's real simple. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. And when leaders start looking at each other and saying, what's mine is yours, then all of a sudden, we're not trying to get anybody to roll under us. So when we go into a city, or even the people working with nationally, we're not trying to get them to roll under Ford and Chuck or TL or At Work on Purpose. What we're saying is, all the tools that we have at TL, they're yours. All the tools we have at AWOP, they're yours. And what's happened is leaders are going, this is what we've been waiting for. Someone to say, let's set our thing aside, give it to each other, stop competing, and start completing with one another. And all of a sudden, we start looking like kingdom. We start smelling like Jesus instead of sounding like Jesus, or at least with our words, but our tone and our body language don't line up with that. But we're finding that when our tone and our body language lines up with our preaching, people run to the gospel. They want it. And so as we're going in, and then I'll share this, and then I'll take questions if you want it. And if you want process quick, well, I'll share on process real quick. But some of y'all know this that have been around me a long time. when we were given prayer events back in 2002, 3, 4, up through 2008, and some of y'all know we gave some fairly large ones. Going into one of those events in 2003, we were praying every Monday night for 3 hours and every Friday morning for 3 hours. And the Lord laid this on my heart, and I texted it to myself. And whatever your terminology is, God spoke to me, laid it on your heart, gave you an impression, whatever your theology has room for here. And I texted this to myself. And I texted, you will get to see a day that leaders in cities and across the country will learn to humble themselves before God and submit to each other. And when they find each other, they will see an accelerated convergence of synchronized destiny. Now, some of y'all know in 2015 and 16, I got really ill and I stayed really sick for a long time, and they finally figured out it was Lyme disease. But every night I was laying in bed saying, God, either take me home tonight or use me or heal me and use me to help others. This isn't fair to Sandra. I mean, it was an every night prayer. Now he did, and now he's using me to help others in that same. But the one thing I held on to during the time that we thought I very likely was dying because the doctors couldn't figure out what was killing me, I hang on to, God, you said that I'd get to live to see a day that leaders in the cities and across the country would learn to humble themselves before you and submit to each other. And when they found each other, they would see an accelerated convergence of synchronized destiny. And as I look on this screen, that's what I see. I see a group of leaders willing to humble themselves before God and submit to one another. When we got to Dayton, that's what Caleb saw. He saw a bunch of people say, one of the things, Chris, you've heard me harp on this for years. Why is it that all these leaders with brilliant brains and huge hearts, what's missing? And I argue it's the practical, implementable tools to be able to connect the heart and the head. Practical, implementable, how to resolve conflict, how to host a meeting, how to listen, how to communicate. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's not easy. And all I'm saying is when I look at this screen and other screens that some of you represent on your screens as you look at, I think we're seeing that. And I think we're seeing it in Cincinnati. And yeah, there's nothing like getting a prophetic word in 2005 sent to you from 100 people, letting you know that God's speaking. You're the growing, you're the reproductive organ. Oh, thanks. That's exactly what you want to be called, the growing. Cincinnati, you're the growing, you're the reproductive organ. And I do believe that Cincinnati, Dayton area, that the word is out. I mean, one of the reasons people hear about Cincinnati is because Cincinnati doesn't brag about it. They don't talk about what you're doing. That's the reason. And all of a sudden people find out that's going on. Yeah, because most cities, when they have a movement, they're up talking about everything they're doing, all they're accomplishing, and research shows they're not accomplishing anything. But the word on Cincinnati is out. We've asked Chris to make videos. We've asked Caleb to make videos. We want people to know, what is it that's going on? And it is about unity. It is about serving one another. And the more that they hear leaders of cities say, this is what we're doing, other leaders of cities want to do the same thing. And guess what happens? Our influence now goes up. And now we're influencing leaders of the nation. So we're now influencing up, not just across. And so thank you for that. Chuck and I, if you choose, we are here to serve you. The process is we meet with a group of neutral conveners. We decide who's going to get invited to the 2-day workshop. We put on the 2-day workshop. After the 2-day workshop, in all the cities we're in right now, so far, it's their choice. They've asked us to hang around and coach with them, walk alongside them for 12 months. Chuck is doing that in some, and I'm doing it in some. He has asked me that if Cincinnati wants to do this, would I take on that role so he could be at the table instead of him taking on that role? And I would offer to do that if you want, or I'll offer to stay out of your way. So that's kind of our process. And I'll take any questions now that, and yeah, I told Chris and the team that I've talked to Sandra about us funding Cincinnati. We may have to raise a little bit, but it won't have to be what we've been raising for other cities. So.
Thanks, Ford. And Chuck, even though he's jumped to his next call. am so grateful that we're having this conversation this way this day. This kind of conversation has been attempted before. I remember one in 1998. I remember one in 2007. I remember one in 2012. And it's always hard because it's so hard to get alignment of hearts and minds, and there's always fears. But it's also hard because we haven't had a process, and we have a process. And Brian, core team, share anything you guys want to share, but it's something that I know for me, I feel so thankful and excited because the way we're doing what we do isn't sustainable and it isn't saturational. And, you know, for me, the idea of having the whole team and a bigger table, because we bring our different parts, coordinating parts from across the city together, from marketplace to local church to so-called alongside church, parachurch, but ecclesia people in all the marketplace at the table with people who their vocational time is in the space of disciple making or multiplying churches or evangelism or biblical justice work. Imagine if that the whole team can align on a shared. The vision isn't going to be different from Jesus' vision, but it will be our articulation of it in its fullness from our hearts together in a 2-day process. And then we have people saying, put me in. I'm willing to fundraise or be part of an organization where there's been fundraising and give my primary hours. I feel called to coordinate and serve under a team of advisors that we would all agree on together, from many more people than are just here on this call, but who are leaders who've walked the walk and the talk of following Jesus with their whole heart. They love well others, and they live well in light of his kingdom and his kingship rooted in his word. And so these are things we all do, mutually accountable to each other, walking in the fruit of the Spirit. And when disagreements or difficulties come, working through those in a Matthew 18 method, which is so easy and so hard, right? But so powerful when it happens. The conclusion of those 3 steps, when followed, is then wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there am I in their midst. And whatsoever they bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatsoever they loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That's a pretty intense, powerful spiritual authority that comes when we work through conflict and have resolution through Jesus's steps. So all that to say, harmony of hearts, agreement from this team in September, the assignment to the core team. We reached out. Ford and Chuck have now said, hey, the dates that we could make work are April 11th and 12th. And that's a Thursday, Friday. We normally have used for a spring retreat, especially including the newcomers to this conversation or this part of it, like Angelina, and return leaders like you, Brian. So awesome to see Brian Kaiser on this call today, one of the backbone people for many years. And what we've typically done is a March retreat on the 3rd Thursday. This meeting is like a metronome, 11:30 to 1, 3rd Thursdays, July and December off. In March, we've done a retreat, sometimes April, using that 3rd Thursday, and then adding a Friday, and everyone just sacrificially making room for it, for the greater cause of Christ together in our city. So we'll publish this. It'll be sent out through the different networks. We'll have to figure out a process, probably with Ford, your guidance, and Chuck's guidance, with the core team, but we're not the only neutral. The core team will be our contribution of neutral conveners, but there are other neutral conveners that need to be part of this. And so Chuck has some. There are maybe even from Mosaics, a couple of leaders that we'll need, but women and men who have a track record among us of walking humbly and yet powerfully in the things of the kingdom. So that team will be getting some practical pieces for April 11th and 12th put together. And but already now, everybody on this call and seeing this recording, reserve your spot on your calendar first, those 2 days. So getting the date set and on your calendars now is your first action step, everybody. And doing your best to carve the time, because it's, you know, in and out is hard. It's like, if we can possibly do it, if you're already able and have the authority within your own schedule to do that. Not everybody has that because of your organization or so forth. But if you do, please do. And then the core team will be rounding back with Ford and Chuck over the next several weeks in order to have concrete might be too strong, a process to share at our January meeting. Does that sound good, everybody? And we'll be taking December off.